Hello and welcome to Studio RC. My name is Pastor Max and I am an alcoholic. And I'm sober today only by the grace of God and the fellowship of the program. And I am also a follower of Jesus. I welcome you here to Studio RC and encouragement for your recovery as well as your faith. Today we're going to start on a journey. This is the calling the nuts and bolts of our faith. One of the things that I've both experienced personally, but also in working with newcomers, have discovered that many people come into recovery, and they come into recovery before they come into faith. And maybe they were raised in the faith, some were not raised in the faith, but whatever it was, an understanding of faith is often elusive, and for a newcomer who's kind of trying to understand or trying to just again understand the basics of faith and what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus. As people are exploring their spirituality and their understanding of their higher power, they're trying to understand how it all works and how it all fits together. And so this series is if you are new to faith, this will hopefully cover some of the basic ideas, some of the basic theology of faith. In this series, we're going to go for several weeks on this series, might even be a couple months, going over various things to just, again, try to help enlighten us and help have a better understanding of our faith. Now, maybe you're someone who is had faith all their life, and it was always an important part, and then came into recovery. Hopefully, this will just be a refresher. Or maybe it just might encourage you and remind you of things, or maybe hopefully teach you some new things along the way as well. And so as we jump into this nuts and bolts introduction, I'm gonna introduce or bring in a word that it sounds like sort of a scary thing, but you'll find that it is not. But we are going to take a look at a catechism. Yee! That sounds like a very churchy word. And P.S., it is a little bit of a churchy word, and it is a word that you might not, when you hear it, you might not know what it means, and most people don't know what the word catechism means. It's not associated with catacombs. It's not a tunnel or but a catechism is simply a practice of teaching the Christian faith. So a catechism is a practice of teaching the Christian faith. And maybe if you ever went to Catholic school, there are catechisms there. In Protestant, there is the Westminster Catechism. We're going to take a little look at that. And there is a newer catechism that they just did about 10, 12 years ago in the early 2010s called the New City Catechism. And it's modern language and modern questions. And so it's a modern take on catechism. But just to put your mind at ease, that a catechism is just a way of teaching faith. And normally, when a catechism is used, the catechism is in the form of a question and an answer. So it asks a certain question, and then it answers the question. And there's often scripture references, and again, it's meant to teach the faith. And so the leaders of the church would come together, and they would put together a catechism in order to help teach those in the faith, whether it was to teach children to how to understand their faith, or as a resource for pastors and how to preach through it. But it was very much a tool used to teach faith. And so as we go through nuts and bolts, we are going to take a look at some catechism, and we'll get into exactly what that looks like as we're going along. But in the previous times when there were new converts to Christianity, they were taught through lectures during the first 4 centuries of the first 4 centuries of the church's existence. But this was very much abandoned as Christianity spread across the globe, and it didn't seem to be the most effective method, especially to combat the growth and to make sure that everyone was on the same page in regards to their teachings. Now, for instance, Recovery Church, we have some basic values of what we would consider Orthodox Christianity, and ideally the values that we hold in regards to our Christian faith that can be found on our website at recovery.church. Those values and those our beliefs should be held by all Christian churches, or most Christian churches. And that was why we chose the beliefs that we did, that we were trying not to be controversial. And so that's one of the ways that we can learn about our faith, is even just looking at Recovery Church's understanding and belief. And in a way, it's not quite a catechism because there's not a question and answer, but again, it lays out what we understand and what we believe. In a catechism was often a main teaching tool throughout Europe, and it was prominent in places like the Scottish Church, and it was all the way back. They were doing this. The Protestant Church was doing this in the 1600s, and the Catholic Church before that. In the one of the most famous catechisms is the Westminster Shorter Catechism, and it was written in 1646 and 1647, and it was by the Westminster Assembly. A group of church leaders came together at the Westminster Abbey, and it was some English and Scottish theologians, and they also had some what we call lay people, or people who are not vocationally clergy. And it was the whole point of when they started the Westminster Catechism was to bring the Church of England into greater conformity with the Church of Scotland. One of the advantages of having a catechism or using a catechism to teach is everyone's teaching the same thing. And so there's no dispute, there's no variation. We're all teaching the same thing. We're all on the same page. And what they would sometimes do is use the memory to kind of memorize the question and the answer. But one of the things that sometimes, even though that was one way to give information, people remembered it, but remembered it in such a way that it had no meaning. And it was just a rote memory, and they could regurgitate it, but they struggled living it. And so the point of it, one of the things that I found about a lot of things in church history and the early teachings, there's a richness to the teaching. But like anything, if it becomes routine and it becomes something that you just do, it loses a lot of its meaning. I have many Roman Catholic friends and have attended many Catholic services, and some of my friends will complain it's just up, down, up, down, up, down, and that's somebody who grew up in the faith and was just going through the motions. Now, for someone like myself who is raised Protestant, going to a Catholic service there's a richness to it. And not that I understood all the times, and I did have to follow a little bit, sometimes when people stand or sit, but there's a richness to the liturgy or the order of worship. But if you get so used to the order of worship, even in a modern church, you get 3 songs, 1 or 2 fast, 1 slow, into prayer. If anything that's done repeatedly and rote can lose its meaning. And there are some days, if if you go to a more contemporary church and a more modern church, and you do worship, and you have some good days of worship, and some days it's you don't connect as much. Sometimes it says more about us than the worship, and some of our preferences, or I knew that song, so I liked that one. And the truth is, whether it's our understanding of our faith or even our worship, none of it was really meant for us. It's all meant for God. Whether it's our worship, whether it's our learning about God, it's for God. And so all of the things that we do in church, from greeting time to offering, to sermon, to worship, however you practice that, whether with hymns, whether with praise bands, whatever that, all of it was meant so that we could connect to God and was on behalf of God. And in connecting with God, it would encourage us. And isn't that such a recovery principle? The thing I want most, if I do it for someone else, then I receive it. And in regards to God, when I connect with God, I feel connected. I'm the one who often feels loved when I'm able to love God. When I'm able to worship God, not that I feel worship, but I feel connected to God. In regards to worship, when someone after church, says, "Oh, I didn't really like worship," an old pastor joke is kind of, well, that's okay because it wasn't for you. We want to remember why we do the things we do. Now back to catechism and teaching of the faith. Back in 1643, I know you got to go in the Wayback Machine, the Westminster Assembly came together and they started writing trying to come up with the important parts of the faith that they wanted to teach. And the purpose of the shorter catechism was initially to educate children. It's based on a larger catechism, which was the larger catechism was specifically used by ministers as they taught the faith to their congregation through their preaching schedule. So it was basically almost a liturgical calendar, liturgical liturgy, the order of worship. So to help pastors, they gave them an order of things to teach and preach on Sunday mornings. And again, the catechism is in a question and answer format, and that was popularized by Martin Luther, the original person who protested with the 95 Thesis. He was a Catholic priest, and there were some things about his faith and the way it was practiced that he thought could be different. And so the famous is he nailed his 95 Theses, his 95 things that he wanted to see changed. And it caused what we call the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was protesting, and that's where we get the word Protestant. He was protesting some of the things of faith, and he found that he was outside of the world he was trying to revolutionize, and so made his own church, and that was how we came to this. And Martin Luther liked to use question and answers in his catechisms, and that became the format that was really adopted. And it was initially to help children learn the meaning of the material rather than just memorizing things like the Lord's Prayer or the Ten Commandments or the Apostles' Creed. And that had been the practice before Martin Luther using these catechisms. They would just remember the Lord's Prayer, Ten Commandments, Apostles' Creed. And this was their way of trying, again, to break the routine of those very important pieces of faith and try to help breathe life into those things. Now, the Westminster Catechism, the shorter catechism, it has 107 questions and answers. And the first 12 questions, they break it into different categories or patterns. And the first 12 questions concern God as creator. And then they have questions 13 through 20, and that deals with original sin and the fallen state of human nature. Questions 21 through 38 concern Christ and Jesus as the Redeemer and the benefits that flow from redemption. The next set of questions, 39 through 84, discuss the Ten Commandments and various aspects of the Ten Commandments. Questions 85 through 97 teach concerning the sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion and our understanding of those things. And then the final set of questions, 98 through 107, again, this is all in the Westminster Catechism, taught and explained the Lord's Prayer. And this very much, this format echoed other catechisms and how they approach things. There was a Heidelberg catechism and that the Reformed Church used. And so that sort of, the Westminster Catechism probably became one of the most famous catechisms. Their first question is, what is the chief end of man? And man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That's the first question of the Westminster Catechism. And one of the things that when you study old things, whether it's the Big Book, whether it's the Bible, some of the catechism kind of teachings, keep in mind they didn't use modern language, and sometimes the language they at the time many of the people felt was inclusive, and so don't hold that against it if it doesn't use inclusive language. And if you need to just change a word to make it more inclusive, that's okay. Don't let that get in the way. Whether it's, again, the Big Book or any of the Bible, I think modern times does a great job of using language that includes everyone without trying to change the translations of the original text. So just keep that in mind. So I want to quickly talk about some significant and faith-related importance of catechism, and then we'll end our first part, and then our second part will delve in a little bit more to some of the specifics before we start our series of nuts and bolts on actually tackling some catechism questions. But here's some important highlights for studying and using catechisms. The first one is, it is a foundation of beliefs. Catechism provides this systematic presentation of the core beliefs of our faith. And the great thing about the catechism is it articulates essential doctrines, the important things, nature of God, the role of Jesus, the significance of the Holy Spirit. This foundational knowledge is crucial both for the new believer as well as those deepening their understanding. So a catechism can help with the foundation of our beliefs. The Big Book talks about how important it is to build a good foundation, and that clearly goes in our faith as well. Catechism is a great educational tool. It serves as a teaching tool that helps individuals learn about their faith in a very structured manner. And so it makes sure that you don't miss anything. And this question and answer also helps with learning, as well as even memorizing and having a comprehension of sometimes complex theological concepts. They're broken down and they become more accessible in this format, and so there's a greater understanding of the faith. A catechism helps with our spiritual formation. It engages and encourages our spiritual growth as well as our maturity and understanding. It invites and helps us to reflect on our own beliefs and practices, and it fosters this deeper relationship with God. As I'm able to see my faith, I can start to see how my behavior should mimic my faith. And it's very much like the 10th step, that actively seeking out, doing a daily inventory of how am I living my life? Am I doing the right things? And how can I do better? And kind of that raising of the bar so that I live out my faith, I live out my recovery in a way that is genuine. There's something about community and even tradition. A catechism connects believers to the broader faith community as well as our historical tradition. And if you remember in Fiddler on the Roof, the one of the main lines is, without tradition, you're as shaky as a fiddler on the roof. And some of our anchors come from the tradition and how we have practiced and understood faith. And that there's not, I think that sometimes there's this new school of thinking that if it's new, it's good, it's better. And sometimes we have to remember where we came from and how we got to where we are and appreciate the forefathers. But whether it's recovery or faith, if you think of it, when anyone talks about changing the big book, it is a hotly contested topic because people don't want to see any of the words change because this is what has helped people. And so there's a connection to those early people who got sober, those first 100 people that got sober. And so there's a connection to history, and the catechism works that way as well. It reflects not only our collective understanding of faith as it's been passed down through generations, but it really reinforces the sense of belonging and continuity within the church. One of the reasons we needed catechism was because as we had this growth, we didn't have enough people sharing and being able to just articulate the faith, and it was an oral tradition. And so the catechism again helped with the spread. It also came at the time of the printing press, so it was easier to get the word out. So all those things came together. Catechism, this way of understanding our faith, is a great guidance for moral living. We talk about in the 4th step taking a moral inventory. Many catechisms include ethical teachings and a guide in how we make moral decisions. It provides a framework for understanding right and wrong, which is part of why we have a moral inventory. The moral inventory talks about right and wrong. If we don't have a standard, we're making the standard. So it's important to have a framework and an understanding of what that is, and it helps us as individuals navigate the complexities of life in light of our faith. One of the things I have found and seen in recovery is the longer you stay sober, our behavior changes, and the things that are acceptable in our behavior changes as well. Something that might be acceptable in year 1, by year 3, you're like, I can't or shouldn't do that. I shouldn't behave that way. And not that we're trying to be perfect, but we continue to raise the bar on how we live our lives. A catechism, great way to defend our faith. We study the catechism. It equips believers with the knowledge to articulate and defend their faith. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I don't know enough. Now, P.S., I'm going to say, for most of you, you know more than you think. There's always room to learn more, and do that. Don't say, I don't know enough, and then just sit back and don't learn. Continue to learn, but you probably know more than you think. But keep learning. And if there are questions, maybe have a journal and you write down the questions. I don't understand this, or I need to figure this out. And maybe, ideally, in a perfect world, the catechism would answer your questions. And if not, you can have a friend in faith or your pastor help you with that. But that really will connect you with your faith. It helps with worship, understanding the significance of the sacraments, prayer, rituals, and it breathes life into those. And then the final thing for a great reason to do a catechism is it helps with personal both reflection and prayer. It serves as this role of being able to look at oneself. By reflecting on the questions and answers, individuals can deepen their understanding both of God's nature and their own faith journey. And these are really essential tools for anyone seeking to deepen their understanding and practice of faith. And so as we go through this nuts and bolts journey and episode, it's going to be all about trying to help you deepen and understand your faith and how you practice your faith and what that looks like combined with your recovery. So that's intro part 1 to nuts and bolts of your faith. We'll be back in our next episode, again, laying the groundwork before we actually jump into some of the questions and answers that will help you better understand your faith. Thanks so much for coming to Studio RC. We encourage you to like, to share, to subscribe, to comment, to just, again, try to increase the footprint of Studio RC so that we can encourage people in their faith and recovery. So again, thank you so much. And remember, Recovery Church, 12 steps, one goal. God bless, and we'll see you next time.